Hi, we want to thank everyone who's attending our Debate Bridge program lecture this evening. We are very fortunate to have with us from the Barkley Forum, Jackson Eckel, Shreyas Rajagopal, and Aaron Gill, who are here this evening to talk about strategic decision making. This is a really salient topic, particularly for debaters as you sort of move into the later speeches of a debate round and sort of thinking about how you understand the debate, but also how you're making decisions as to what arguments you're going for and how the judge may be viewing the round. And so we're really excited today to have these really three great debaters sort of explaining their thought process and how you will be thinking about things as you become, you get to those sort of later stages of your debate rounds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name's Jackson. I think we're going to roughly have this lecture divided into three different sections. The first one, we're going to talk about decision-making before the round and prepping and what that looks like. Then we're going to talk about decision-making during the round and especially during those later rebuttals. And then we're going to talk about, have a quick bit on like what we think you should do if you feel like you're losing or if you feel like you're behind on certain parts of the debate. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Aaron, feel free to jump in anytime if you have anything to say, anything you want to contribute. So pre-round decision-making. When you're affirmative, when you're choosing between different AFs, you want to think about the judge and the team you're debating. So maybe questions to ask, things like, does the other team like to go for disads with big impacts? Then maybe you also want to have an AF with the big impact to weigh against theirs. Do they also like to go for counterplans and try to solve the affirmative? Then you might want to make sure to think about the part of your AF that only your affirmative can solve and think about how you'll explain that and articulate that in the debate. Once you know what AF you're reading, you want to look at the arguments your opponents have read and what they've gone for to get an idea of what you'll likely debate. Then the 1A and the 2A should generally work together and plan together on what strategy is for different arguments. This will be covered more by Shreyas later. The goal of the 2AR is not to try to extend every argument, right? You want to extend a few of your best arguments that you think will win you the debate at the end of the round. For example, take the Georgia Senate runoffs dissad. I don't know how familiar people are with this, but the argument is that Democrats are going to win the Senate in Georgia now, but the plan angers the GOP base and causes them to turn out, which leads to a Republican-controlled Senate, which is bad, insert an impact. Maybe if you read a smaller affirmative, the most strategic argument for you to make would be like a no link. Maybe you have really good uniqueness evidence and that's something you want to push on. Whatever that argument is that you think you're strongest in, you want to kind of know that before the round and know a couple places where you're strongest. And so you can communicate with your partner to spend time there in the 1AR so that you can go for that argument in the 2AR. Obviously, you have to adapt. So you always want to have options available for the 2AR. You never want to be like, this is the only argument I can go for, and this is the only argument I want to extend. But generally, the 2A should have some sense of knowledge and some kind of feeling about what arguments they want to extend. Second is negative strategic planning. So this is a very difficult part of the debate. Being neg generally is very tricky. But one of the main things to keep in mind when figuring out a negative strategy is that you should always think backwards, i.e. what do I want to go for in the 2NR? And then you can work backwards from there. So some factors to consider when deciding what to go for in the 2NR. One, your skill level, how comfortable you are with certain arguments. Let's say there's a dissad that you go for all the time and you're pretty good at it. That doesn't mean that you should automatically go for that dissad, but it can be an advantage when you know your argument much better than the other team. Another thing to consider is how well the argument you want to go for interacts with the affirmative. You want to look for arguments that have strong link evidence and has a strong link and a strong impact that could mess with the AF's impact and complicate their ability to solve. Once you know what the ideal 2NR is, you can start thinking backwards. Is the dissad you want to go for in the 2NR going to be in the 2NC or the 1NR? If it's in the 1NR, what are you going to go in the 2NC? Things like that. Ideally, the rest of the block is also useful, right? You don't want to just put a bunch of throwaway arguments and show your hand early. If they concede or undercover an argument from the block that you weren't planning on going for, but if it makes strategic sense, you should be able to go for that. That's why the plan 2NR might be referred to like as the A strat or an A strategy, but the rest of the block should give you a fallback option or two, maybe like topicality or counterplan options. All that being said, you should have an A strategy or something that you feel like would be most strategic, but you should also have those fallback options, that B strat or C strat that you're ready to go for. Then once you know roughly what arguments you want to put in the block, you can construct your 1 and C with those arguments and then have all the applicable off case. Last thing to consider, judges. It's very important to read paradigms. On tab rooms, judges have a list of their debate thoughts that are definitely important. A judge might have a list of things they think are important or arguments they prefer to hear. For example, one judge might think turn case is just like super important and must be talked about for a long time, while another judge may not be as concerned with it. But this form of judge adaptation takes practice, but over time, it'll help you figure out what arguments to make and how to deploy them most effectively in that round.
I can talk a little bit about sort of strategy during the debate. And I think that the sort of focus of this portion is going to be on rebuttal speeches and some strategic thinking and planning that we might want to do in those particular speeches. So I'm sort of just going to go down the 4 rebuttal speeches, the 1NR, the 1AR, the 2NR, and then the 2AR after that. So let's start with the 1NR, right? I think that the way that most people should approach the 1NR is that we should think of it as a mini constructive. Essentially, think about this in the context of the 2NC as well, right? The negative gets 2 back-to-back speeches, the 2NC and the 1NR, and this is 13 minutes where the negative gets to say, expand on their arguments from the 1NC. And so one really important thing that we want to have with the 1NR is that we want to make sure that it's distinct. We want to make sure that we do not repeat things that were said in the 2NC, right? And I think something really important for everyone to understand is that no matter what level of debate you are in, it's really easy to make silly mistakes, like maybe reiterating the same arguments that were in the 2NC and the 1NR, or like reading the same piece of evidence. Those are all just things that we want to avoid because we want to maximize the efficiency of our negative speeches. There's a variety of arguments that you can explain in the 1NR, like counterplans, disads, case, etc. You just want to make sure that it's split and not repetitive, which is something that we should do to maximize efficiency. The 1NR should also try and be one of the best speeches in the debate, right? Judges oftentimes have very high thresholds for these speeches, and you should sort of think why. Let's talk about just in the context of the time that you have to prepare for the 1NR. From the time the 2AC ends, you have 8 minutes of the 2NC where you're going to be preparing your 1NR. You're going to have 3 minutes of 2NC cross-secs where you can also be preparing your 1NR, and then any prep time that your partner or your opponents might take. So that gives you at minimum 11 minutes to prepare your 1NR, which is a lot of time. So judges oftentimes have a very high threshold for this, and you want to make sure that you're making really, really smart arguments. Now, the 1AR, this is a very, very hard speech. Let's go back to sort of how we thought about speech times, right? You have 5 minutes in the 1AR to respond to 13 minutes of negative argumentation. The most important thing here is that efficiency matters. Regardless of if you're fast, if you're slow, if you're like medium speed, the most important thing is that we're efficient in the arguments that we're making. Let's talk about strategy, right? Before you give this speech, before you even start preparation, you have to have a conversation with your partner who's giving the 2AR and the final speech in the debate. What do they think the most threatening negative argument is coming out of the block? And what is our best argument against it, right? We want to make sure that we answer that particular argument thoroughly. And likewise, if it's very obvious that one particular argument the negative is making is not great, they're probably not going to go for it, we don't need to spend a lot of time in the 1AR answering it. So time allocation is super, super important. So like we can also divide the 1AR into how we are going to answer on case positions and off case positions, right? On case, we want to make sure that we knock it out, get it out of the way first. But we also want to make sure that we are answering every argument and not losing our best piece of offense. So what does this mean, right? First, we want to make sure we're grouping arguments, especially when they are repetitive. You know, when the negative has a lot of time to make arguments, some of the stuff they're going to say is inevitably going to be repetitive. And you can say, maybe group these arguments and provide one answer that applies to both of them, right? Similarly, you can apply warrants to answer different arguments, which also ends up saving time. Another important choice here is picking and choosing. Remember the discussion we had about like the 2A and listening to your partner? What arguments do you need to win the debate and what arguments maybe you don't need to win the debate? This is a question that you should ask yourself. And this is also where condensing down comes into play, right? You want to collapse down to your best arguments on a particular flow. So let's say that the 1AC that you read has 2 advantages, And the 2NC has a bunch of arguments on this one particular advantage, and maybe not a lot of arguments on this other advantage. You should maybe consider going for the one that they have little to say on, and that way it saves you a lot of time, and you don't have to worry about answering a bunch of arguments that they might have made. Second, we want to be doing a lot of impact comparison, and I think this is super, super important, right? Let's say let's say you give the 1AR and the 2NR gives their speech, and coming out of the 2NR, your arguments against the negative arguments are not that strong. At the end of the day, you always have your affirmative and impact comparison to say that your affirmative outweighs or your impacts matter more, right? Now, when we're talking about off case and answering off case in the 1AR, a lot of what I said above applies. Let's say the 2AC has like a non-uniqueness, a no link, and a no impact argument, right? You would be better off in the 1AR extending one of those in depth instead of extending all three of them and maybe not fleshing out any warrants. For the 2NR, a very, very big and important thing for the 2NR to do is sort of get big picture framing issues out of the way, right? Because the 2NR is also very, very difficult speech to give. And the reason why it's difficult to give is that the 1AR has extended a lot of arguments, and you have to preempt and answer what the 2AR is going to go for. So a lot of this speech also requires you to predict and understand what the 2AR might do and make sure you covered that adequately. So what argument are you for sure winning coming out of the 2NR or coming out of the 1AR, and use that argument to filter a lot of the affirmatives offense. Another important thing that we want to remember is that we want to make sure that we get to answering the affirmatives case, right? Obviously, it's important to have your disad or your counterplan or whatever piece of offense you're going for, but it's equally as important to contest the affirmatives piece of offense, right? We want to win defense and we want to win offense. And so making sure we're getting to all levels of that debate is super important in the 2NR. And just like everything I said about the 1AR, picking and choosing, being efficient, all of this also applies to the 2NR. And for the 2AR, I think you should remember what Jackson said, right? The 2AR is likely to pick the biggest issue and sort of expand on it. It's not about extending everything from the 1AR. It's about looking at the flow, seeing which argument you're winning, and sort of understanding and telling the judge how that one argument means you win the entire debate, right? So applying it to different portions of the debate. And essentially the way that you want to give the 2AR is that you want to sort of make it seem like it's the judge's reason for decision, right? So think about this when you're talking about the 2AR. You're essentially trying to convince the judge why they should vote affirmative or what their ballot should look like, right? So at the end of the debate, when the judge is like, I vote affirmative for XYZ reason, you want those XYZ reasons to be in the 2AR. And so alongside the 2AR also comes stylistic appeal, right? So we want to make sure that we're super persuasive and we sound super good in the 2AR. The 2AR does not need to be the fastest speech in the debate, but it's super, super helpful if it's one that sounds the best and it's the most persuasive.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of speech strategy, there's also a key where you need to understand the order in which you answer the arguments they have on your offense compared to their offense. An example, if you're the affirmative, you want to make sure you answer the arguments they have on your case on top, as a lot of times, if you drop a disad, maybe it's possible to weigh your case against the disad, but if you don't answer the defense against your advantages, it's kind of difficult to be able to do that. And so you need to order the arguments that the negative makes, and you need to order the arguments the negative makes in order of how strategic they are to the negative if you were to lose them. So for example, you'd want to put topicality towards the top of your answering, because if you lose topicality, it becomes a losing debate for the affirmative. So if you drop topicality, the debate's over at that point, almost for sure. And then followed by critiques and counterplans, as their advocacies can tend to try and solve 100% of the affirmative case, but then have some kind of small net benefit the affirmative doesn't access. And so in which case, if you lose that, it'll become a losing part of the debate. And so you would just want to put those in ahead of order so that you have some answers to the things that are threatening, and you could lose the debate off of those.
Finally, one thing that I want to talk about a little bit, and then Shreyas and Aaron, feel free to jump in if you have any other thoughts, but just covering what to do when you think you're losing. This happens to all of us. So I think it's interesting and important to think about. So one thing is just to focus on what arguments you're winning and try to make those arguments the most important thing in the debate, regardless of what they are, right? That may take some creativity, and it may require reframing the debate and telling the judge, this is now the most important thing. But if you think you're losing the debate in other areas, that can be really important. For example, if you're affirmative and you're behind on the disad, but are still winning some risk of your case, you can make, try or die claims to make their disad seems less important. If you access some kind of like extinction impact or some really large impact, you can say, well, we know that they're winning their disad, but they still have not mitigated our risk of case. Our case has a faster time frame and comes first, which means that even if they're winning a bigger risk of their disad, you should still prioritize solving something that you know is coming soon. There are also other things you can do. You can maybe extend theory or other tricky arguments to try to pressure your opponent and make them spend time on other things so they don't have as much time to talk about your own arguments. Finally, projecting confidence. You never want to appear like you're losing, right? Like even if you know like you're behind on this part of the debate, you never want to appear that way. Ethos matters a lot, persuasion. It can also help to acknowledge when you know that you're behind on certain arguments, but you can still win, but you still think you can win the debate. You can have like judge connections moments where you're telling the judge, look, I know it seems like we're behind on this debate, on this part of the debate, or I know it seems like we're behind on this argument, but I'm going to tell you why that doesn't matter and why this thing that we're winning matters more. So it's about projecting that confidence and about acknowledging that the judge may have doubt about your position, but then trying to convince them otherwise. One other thing that I thought was funny that Shreyas and I, some advice that we got from one of the debaters on our team is that your partner, especially if your partner is giving the 2AR or the 2NR, you as their partner should have your screen on and you should be aggressively nodding when they say things or when they have big ethos claims, right? Like you just want to nod along with them. You want to make it look like they're obviously right. Like just any little edge you can find to try to act persuasive, to try to have that ethos, to try to project that confidence, that stuff can go a long way, especially in those final rebuttals when the judge has to think about a lot of things in order to make their decision. I don't know. I don't think we have anything else to say. If people have questions, we are happy to answer them.
So we'll go ahead and stop the recording at this point, and then we'll open it up for questions. So hold on one second.
I think the best way, and I think the best way to order your speeches and what I do when answering things is I always start with the advantages because that's our offense, and so we absolutely have to win that in order to win the debate. There's no way around it. If you lose your advantages, more than likely not, you're going to lose the debate, and so I'll put that at the top of my order, and then following my advantages, or however many I have, I'll go to the topicality arguments, because topicality is another one of those things where if the affirmative loses topicality, as it's saying, because topicality is basically an argument that says the debate shouldn't have happened to begin with. And so if you lose that argument, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to lose the debate. And so I would answer topicality after that. And once you get past that topicality, it becomes almost preference, but there's a preferential order in which you should give them. A lot of people say you can interchange critiques and counter plans in the order of how you want to answer them. I personally put critiques ahead of the counter plan, as sometimes people who read critical arguments, they'll say solving this critique is a prerequisite to anything that the affirmative can solve. And so it becomes a little more difficult and challenging to win if you lose on the critique flow versus a counter plan flow, in my opinion. And so I'll always answer the critique before counter plans. And then I'll follow with the counter plan, simply because counter plans will try to solve most, if not all, of the case and with some kind of external net benefit. And so if you lose something that solves the entirety of the case, it becomes a reason not to do the case because they're going to do what you do and something better than that. And so I would just push back against the counter plans before moving on to my disadvantages. And then going to my disadvantages, I order them in the order of how threatening I think they are. For an example, I'll put like a federalism disad towards the bottom of my disadvantages versus something other like a politics 2020 disad, even though that's not unique right now, just because I think that federalism isn't as big of a disadvantage, because I think it's kind of non-unique within the era of Trump and how he's threatening federalism. And so in arguments where I think they can have less warranting out in order to fully answering the arguments, and you don't have to do as much explanation on your arguments, I would put those disadvantages below other disadvantages where they may have a level of truthiness, and your advantage might actually cause those disadvantages, and so you're pushing back against the truth, where I would put those at the top.
So same question. Aaron, thank you so much for that response. That was a great response. Any additional insight, Shreyas or Jackson? Or any disagreement? Are you saying like, nah, Aaron, you really should have put them disadvantaged?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Something I've also seen done, this is not necessarily like that Aaron was wrong. Something I've seen done is that, let's say like the 1 and C didn't read that many off case, and you're confident you can get to them with a lot of the time. Sometimes you want to put what you think their strongest disad might be on the bottom. So that way that you can try to get to it. When you get to it, you have all the rest of your time in the 2AC to make additional arguments that you wouldn't be able to make if you put it more in the middle. So that's something, but that's also dependent on like, how time pressed your 2AC is. Do you think you're going to have time to get to all your arguments? But everything else Aaron said with, I totally agree. It's just that general frame of thinking about what do I have to win the debate, and then ordering the negative arguments that are most threatening in that way.
And kind of going off of what Jackson said, some teams that are really tricky debaters will put like the most, and I don't suggest this for most people because it's important to answer the most threatening thing first. But like Jackson said, if a team has a lot of time and they know they can get to, they know there's only one argument the negative is really going to go for in this debate, if in the 2AC, they'll likely save it for the very end because it means the negative technically has less time to prepare for it in the block. Because like if you introduce it early, if you like answer it early on in the 2AC, then they have the rest of your 2AC to also prepare for it. But if you save it for the end, then they might have to take more prep time. And so that's like for like super tricky debaters. And so it's not usually like something that's done very often because it can oftentimes go super wrong too. So you want to make sure that like you know for a fact that the negative is going to do this before you try and play around with that. But I think a general rule of hand for most people is that we want to get the most threatening stuff over with, because most speeches are not like that. Most speeches are time pressed. There's a lot of arguments you have to answer. And in that world, it's really important to put the most threatening stuff first.
So again, while we're either waiting for someone to raise their hand or to give us another question in the chat, I will share another question that we did get that got sent in to us from other debaters were, what is a signal to you that you are sort of losing on an argument, particularly if perhaps you're less familiar with the argument? So I'm thinking potentially this answer, the question the student is asking may come from critiques, or like, what if it's an argument you don't know how to answer, so you don't know whether or not you're behind on it, or maybe you are behind, but you don't know because you don't understand the critique well or can't respond to it well. I guess that could be broken up into two sort of different questions, which is one, what do you do with an argument that you either don't have answers to, or you don't know how to respond to it, or don't think you're responding well? And then two, what are signals to you that you're losing on an argument? Like, what is a signal to you that you need to do right? Some of the strategies that y'all have brought up more explicitly throughout this conversation.
Yeah, so for an argument that I might not necessarily have answers to, it may be new, or for whatever reason it's not prepped out. I just like to kind of say the opposite of what they're saying, if that makes sense, because I think it's better to have something put down than have nothing said at all. So if they said we link for this reason, I'll just say, no, we don't link, and then say the opposite of what they said. I don't think it's a good strategy, but I mean, it's better than not having anything at all on the flow, and then maybe you'll have some evidence that can back up what you said. But I think that's just the minimum of what you should do. Maybe you'll have answers to other things that you could read on it, but also you could have impact defense to push against their defense. So maybe in the case where even if you do lose that you don't link to a disad, you can say that the impact doesn't happen for whatever reason. And I'll let Jackson and Shreyas answer that before I move on to the next question.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. One thing I would consider, something that Aaron said, is that impact defense can be very important in those scenarios. So let's say you're AF, they broke a new disad, and you have no idea what's going on in these internal link chains, and you're not really sure what the link is. Usually, not always, but usually the impact will be something more typical, right? It's not going to be, some really far out impact most of the time, because a lot of the biggest impacts are the same things like war or economic decline or, violence against minorities, things like that. Those are all impacts that are bad and that you probably already have impact defense to. So maybe when something new is broken against you or some new kind of argument, you can fall back on that impact defense a lot of times. One other helpful thing to do is have whoever the partner is that has to, that isn't immediately dealing with that evidence, so like doesn't have to create the 2AC or isn't working on the 2NC, they can read those cards and look more in depth. So while one of you is like putting together the 2AC, or one of you is trying to put together the 2NC, and like, when you have no answers and you're just grasping for straws, you can assign your partner, or one of you can spend time looking at those cards, reading maybe the unhighlighted parts, or, going back to the article to see what it says. And then maybe you can get from that some analytical argument. Let's say it's like a politics diss ad. It's probably not very good, just because politics diss ads, especially ones that are new and unheard of, usually aren't the best. What you can do, you can take advantage of that. Go read, look at their internal link evidence, their link evidence. You can make logical arguments against it, like, hey, this logically doesn't line up. You can also look at their evidence and see where times like the evidence might disagree with the way they presented it. And then you can use that against that. And oftentimes when you face these new arguments, a combination of impact defense and just like logical presses against the disadvantage or the other argument are usually enough so that you can rely on your AF outweighing.
Yeah, I think just a lot of what Jackson and Aaron said, I completely agree. And like, worst case scenario, you have absolutely nothing. Impact comparison is what it gets down to. You know what their impact is, even if you don't fully understand like the internal link or link level of it. And so being able to compare your impacts to theirs, showing why yours outweighs, and just even doing the bare minimum can go a really long way.
And to answer the second question, how to tell if you're losing an argument, a lot of times I think if I'm getting outcarded on a flow, like if I have like 4 cards on a flow and they read like 25, I'll think that maybe I'm losing that flow. Well, that's not always the truth, because sometimes they're just reading some really bad cards, and so your 4 cards might be enough to take out their 25 cards. I think a lot of times the number of cards and the comparison between how many cards you have can be a good determination of if you're losing on a flow or not. Another time I like to think of if I'm losing a flow is how well I understand the argument. Because if you don't understand the argument, a lot of times you may, even if you think you're doing fine on the argument, you could end up being behind just because you don't understand the nuances of their link and internal link chains to get down to what they really say you're doing. And so you just may be getting out nuanced on the argument.
And one other thing, I think one of the questions was kind of in the context of critical arguments. And I think that especially when like you're reading critiques or you're facing those arguments and you're not really sure what they're saying, a lot of the times it's best to kind of take a step back. Let's say you're reading a critique and they make a bunch of arguments and you're not really sure, what each of them means. And a lot of them can seem very specific. It can be easy to like get in the weeds in those arguments, try to figure out like what exactly the card's saying. But oftentimes the card, there's only so many categories of presses that your card makes. Either the card is like, trying to disprove the theory of the critique, or trying to disprove the link, or trying to disprove alternative solvency or impact, or how bad the impact is. So once you kind of figure out what part of the critique that card or that argument is trying to disprove, then even if you don't know exactly what that argument is, by just like making more arguments about why your theory are true or why your link is true, it can kind of be an indirect answer, even if you're not like 100% interacting with that argument.
And I think this is also a place where cross-ex, prep time, etc., is the importance of maximizing it and making it the most efficient becomes super important. Because I know that we say a lot of the times cross-ex is for trying to get some argumentation in, trying to like show how you have an upper hand against the team, trying to point out errors in their sort of theory or whatever. But oftentimes, and the premise of cross-ex itself is to get clarification to some extent. And so using it in a way in which you're getting the most out of it, either by asking them to explain a link or asking them to maybe explain their theory, I think can be super helpful. And that oftentimes can sort of tip the scale, right? So even if you have a very basic understanding of their link, that is something that you can answer. That's something that you can use your affirmative to respond to, or use your affirmative to weigh against. And I think even the smallest clarifications can become super useful in those instances.
Also, just like piggybacking off something Shreya says, like never, when you're encountering new stuff like that, never be afraid to use more prep time than usual in the early parts of the speech. Like I know, debaters are encouraged to, use a little bit of prep at the beginning, especially for like 2AC and 2NC, but then to try to save as much as you can for the last rebuttals because those speeches are harder. Yes, it's true that you want to have as much prep as possible for those last rebuttals, but also that prep's not going to matter very much if like you decided not to use prep in the 2AC or 2NC and then just like drop the ball in argument because you didn't have enough time to understand it, right? So that prep time for those last rebuttals only matters insofar as that you have all the arguments in place and you understand, what arguments they're making. So worst case, you see a new argument, you're not really sure what it's saying, take the prep time, read it thoroughly, talk with your partner about what it's saying, and then try to come up with a strategy, and that will put you in the better place later in the debate, even if you don't have as much prep time.
Okay, and then this will be our last question if we don't get any more from our audience here who's here with us today. So one of the things that you all brought up was what to do if you're losing. What happens, or what are your sort of insight for our debaters if you go into a round with the idea you might be losing? Maybe you've gotten your pull-up right into a division. Maybe this team just runs arguments that you're just not prepared to interact with or that you generally just don't see. What sort of thoughts should you take into the round with you, or what sort of strategy do you take into a round with you where you're just knowing, where you go into the debate round thinking, right, like this is not in my favor, this is not set up to benefit me?
I think one of the most important things is ethos and projecting. And so no matter how much you think you might gonna lose this round, or you feel unconfident, you cannot let that show. So being confident, even if you think that they're going to get you on this one argument, answering cross-ex questions confidently. If they're getting a bit aggressive, project back and make sure that you don't crumble. And I think that goes a long way, right? For a couple different reasons. First is that, let's say that the judge you have in the back of the room who's judging the debate is someone who's maybe not very argument or flow oriented, but as a person who evaluates your speaking style and a person who makes her decision based off of who's more persuasive. That becomes super important and super useful to have in that situation, right? And second, something that's also important is that a round is not just about who wins and who loses, right? Every tournament you go to, you're going to debate a team. It's likely you're going to debate a team who's better than you, or a team that has an argument that you might not know the answer to. But a round is more than just a winner and a loser. There's speaker points involved. And those speaker points can play a huge role, especially in determining things like your seating, speaker awards, when you break, what teams you hit. And so even if you know for a fact you're going to lose that round, making sure that you sound good, you sound persuasive, and you sound confident, all of these things can boost your speaking point and make you seem like you're winning the debate. And so it goes a long way when you're just a bit more confident and you're able to project that to the judge just a bit more.
Yeah, another thing to consider is like, when we've all been there, we've gotten that pairing, we're like, oh gosh, like this is not going to go well. But one thing to consider is like, especially when you're younger and you're just starting out, the like debate, it's kind of cliche, but debate is a process. It's not a product. The reason why you're debating is not to win that one round, right? It's to keep learning through a process of debating a bunch of rounds. And then through debating a bunch of rounds, you're getting better. And then eventually, hopefully you are that team that, other teams don't want to get the pairing with. So the idea, when you get that pairing, it's definitely, it's natural to feel nervous. You're like, oh, this is not going to go well. I'd encourage you to just like reframe it like, this is a learning opportunity, take note of like what the other team is doing so well, or like, what makes them so good, and remember that and try to use that to influence your own speaking and your own debating. Ask the judge a lot of questions, especially if like an argument that's new and you don't really know how to interact with that. Asking the judge questions can be really helpful and not only understanding how the judge perceives that argument, but what the judge thinks the best answers might be. And most of the time, the judge will be definitely willing to tell you. Like if you just ask them like after the debate, hey, what argument should we be making? Most judges will be pretty helpful, I think, in telling you exactly what arguments they think you should be making, which will help you in later debates.
Yeah, and I think going into a debate where you might be the underdog, I don't think you should ever go into the debate with the idea that you're going to lose the debate, because every team is beatable. There's never been a team in the history of policy debate that has never lost a round in every debate they've ever had, which means that at some point somewhere another team had to beat them, and there's no reason you couldn't be that other team. And so I just think, while maybe there may be a more difficult way to win the debate, there's always a way to do it. You, as the affirmative, you could try and get them to make a accidental mistake and maybe drop a theory argument and get them and try and win the debate off of that. But there's always a way to get around that hurdle of maybe a team on paper being better than you, but that does not necessarily mean you're going to lose the debate.
On that super uplifting note, we want to thank again Jackson, Shreyas, and Aaron for giving us this presentation today. They did an awesome job. We look forward to hosting them and other debaters at future Debate Bridge sessions in the future. If you have any follow-up questions for any of the folks that you've seen here today, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to pass them along. And hopefully we can encourage them to perhaps join us again next semester for another lecture.